I thought I was coming home to a quiet Tuesday evening. I had no idea I was walking into the opening move of a scheme my mother-in-law had been rehearsing for 2 years. A scheme my husband had been quietly facilitating every single time he picked up the phone and didn't tell me she'd called. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not our house. Our house smelled of wood polish and the faint trace of candles and last night's pasta still living gently in the kitchen air. This was something else. The layered, occupying scent of delivery food spread across multiple surfaces, and underneath it, a perfume I didn't consciously recognize, but that my body knew because my shoulders tightened before my brain had finished processing the information. Amber-based, heavy, the kind that stays in rooms. I had driven 40 minutes home from the office with my left heel blistering and my shoulders carrying 11 hours of a contract negotiation that nobody else in the department had wanted to touch. And I had been looking forward, with the specific longing of someone who has earned the right to look forward to something, to the particular ordinary piece of my own house. A glass of something cold, shoes off on the mat. Marcus turning from the stove with that lazy, unhurried smile he had when the day was behind him and nothing difficult was waiting. Instead, I stood in my own doorway and found the living room rearranged. The coffee table, the heavy one from the Vermont estate sale, the one with the mug ring on the left side that I had never sanded away, had been pushed nearly to the wall. In its place, 3 open pizza boxes, 2 platters of sushi with decorative bamboo grass between the rolls, a bottle of sparkling wine already partially consumed, 2 glasses, and a third glass recently emptied and ringed at the lip with a deep burgundy lipstick print I did not own. Marcus was on the couch in a clean, pressed shirt. Not the shirt he'd left in that morning, a fresh one, blue, the kind he wore when he wanted to look like he'd made an effort. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, and beside him, in my armchair, the one angled toward the window, the one with the small indentation in the left armrest from years of my elbow resting in exactly the same spot, sat a woman in her late 60s, silver hair cut precisely at the jaw, dressed in layers of soft gray and ivory, hands wrapped around a wine glass, head tilted at a practiced angle, laughing at something Marcus had said. Sylvie, my mother-in-law, who had, apparently, flown in from Paris. Marcus turned, saw me. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, more the micro-expression of a man who has been caught doing something not wrong, but not quite right, who has exactly 1 second to decide how to handle it. He stood up. He came toward me with the warmth of the room he'd been in the middle of still carrying on his face like heat from a fire. He kissed my cheek, a quick, functional press, the kind that is technically for the person being kissed and actually for the room watching. And then he stepped back and looked at me, and I watched the recalibration happen behind his eyes. "You smell like work," he said. I looked at him. "Mom flew in this morning," he said, his voice dropping, offering it as context, as mitigation. "She surprised me. It's been months. Can you maybe—" He tilted his head back toward the living room, the gesture of a man requesting something be smoothed over. "Freshen up first? Just don't ruin the mood." The table was loaded with food I had not ordered, wine I had not opened, for a guest I had not been told was coming. And my husband, the man I shared a bed and a mortgage and a life with, had just told me I smelled bad and asked me not to ruin the mood. I didn't speak. I opened my banking app. The most recent transaction had posted 38 minutes ago. A delivery consolidator, pizza and sushi bundled, $314.62. My card, not his, mine. "Babe," Marcus said, reading my face, or trying to, "I'll sort it out." I looked at him for a moment. I looked at the number on my phone. I looked at the woman in my armchair who had not yet turned to acknowledge my arrival in my own house. And I felt, with a clarity that surprised me with its temperature, not hot, not cold, but precise, surgical, the temperature of a decision, that I was done absorbing things and calling it grace. I opened the Uber app. I searched for available drivers. I selected the most economical option, not because I couldn't afford better, but because the choice itself was the sentence. I entered an address, not a hotel downtown, a motel off the interstate exit that I'd passed 1,000 times on my commute, a place that existed in the category of establishments specifically designed to remind people that comfort is not a given. I set the pickup location as our house. I confirmed the booking, 4 minutes away. Then I walked back into the living room. Sylvie had turned now. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who has spent decades learning to read rooms, and who had already read this one and found it mildly interesting. Her eyes were dark and clear, and underneath the social warmth she wore like a coat, entirely awake. "Oh," she said. Her English was French-inflected, musical in the way that makes everything sound like a compliment and slightly like it isn't. "There she is. We were wondering when you'd arrive." She did not stand. She did not offer her hand. She lifted her glass instead. "Sylvie," I said. "Welcome." I checked the app. "Your ride is outside." The silence had mass. Marcus turned with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not hurt, something more primitive. The face of a man who has miscalculated something and cannot yet identify what. "What did you say?" "There's a car outside," I said, "for both of you if you'd like." "You're kicking my mother out," he said. "I'm offering her a ride," I said. "She's jet-lagged. She should rest." Sylvie set down her glass. The social warmth had gone from her face the way a light goes off, cleanly, completely. And what remained was something cooler and more considered. And I recognized it because it was, I realized, what had always been there, just without the overlay. She looked at me across the rearranged furniture and the cooling sushi and the open pizza boxes, and she said one word. "Interesting." One syllable, dropped like a coin into a well, not to make a wish, but to measure the depth. She stood from my armchair, smoothed her ivory blouse, picked up her glass, finished the last inch of sparkling wine with a small, precise sip, set the glass down, and walked to the front door with the unhurried grace of a woman who has never in her life been moved by force. Marcus followed, looking back at me once with an expression I couldn't fully read and wasn't sure I wanted to. I stood in my living room, my house, my furniture, my card. The door closed behind them. I heard the gravel under their feet, the car door, the engine departing, and I thought, yes, we're just getting started. He came back inside alone 11 minutes later. I was at the kitchen sink running hot water over the dishes, not because they needed it yet, but because I needed something to do with my hands, something simple and rhythmic that would give me a reason to keep my back to the room while I thought. He stood in the kitchen doorway. I could feel the quality of his stillness. Not acceptance, not yet, but the stillness of a man cycling through responses and finding all of them inadequate. His hands went to his pockets, which was what he did when he didn't know what to do with them. I had loved that once. It had seemed vulnerable, endearing. Now it seemed like a symptom of something I'd been too patient with for too long. "That was unnecessary," he said. "Was it?" I said. Not a question. "She's my mother, Elena." Full name, the Register of Grievance. "She flew from Paris. You couldn't just—" "She flew from Paris," I agreed, without telling me. "You let her in without telling me. You ordered $300 of food on my card without telling me. And when I came home after 11 hours of work, you told me I smelled and asked me not to ruin the mood." I said this without volume, reciting facts, because facts, stated plainly, don't need amplification. I want to make sure I have the sequence right. His mouth opened and closed. The muscle in his jaw worked. "I was going to tell you she was coming. It happened fast. She called this morning." "When this morning?" Pause. "Around 9? You had 10 hours, Marcus. I was going to tell you when you got home. And the card?" This pause was longer, shaped differently. "I didn't have cash." "You have your own card." It was easier. I didn't think you'd—" He stopped. "Make it a thing?" I said. "I don't make things. I notice them. There's a difference." I turned off the tap. "Go to sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." I went upstairs. I ran the shower hot and stood under it for longer than necessary, and I thought, which is what I do when I need the noise that functions as silence. I thought about Sylvie. I had met her 3 times before tonight. The first time at Marcus's sister's wedding 4 years ago, she had asked about my work with an interest I now understood had nothing to do with my work. It was about my numbers, my stability, my asset column. She had asked, with a light touch I'd read as warmth, about the house. "You own it?" How practical. I had heard practical as a compliment. I had not heard it as the beginning of a category. The second time, Christmas 2 years ago, 9 days, staying with us, moving through every room with the quiet attention of someone taking an inventory. Questions about the neighborhood, the property values, whether I'd had it appraised recently. She had admired the bones of the place and said it had potential. I had heard potential as a compliment. I had not heard it as a word that contains within it an implicit claim. The third time was in Paris, 14 months ago. Over dinner and good wine, she had told a long, nostalgic story about Marcus as a child, about the family apartment, about how important home had always been. Le foyer, you understand. For us, the family home is everything. And I had nodded warmly, thinking, what a lovely woman she can be when she chooses. I had not thought, she is establishing a framework in which home and family are inseparable. I had not thought, she is telling you this because she needs you to have absorbed it before she tells you the next part. I turned off the shower. I wrapped myself in a towel, and I sat on the edge of the tub, and I opened my banking app, and I went back. Not 6 weeks, 12 months, 41 transactions I could not explain, 13 months, $4,832, various merchants, a grocery delivery service I didn't use, a home goods retailer at an address I didn't recognize, a travel consolidator, a restaurant I'd never been to. Each charged between $100 and $300, each one small enough to avoid the alert threshold I'd set. Together, they made a shape. I sat on the edge of the tub for a long time. His card hadn't been flagged, or it had, eventually, but before that, something else had been happening, something slower and more considered. And I had been too busy working 11-hour days and paying the mortgage and trusting the life I thought I was in to count the transactions I should have been counting. On Thursday morning, I called Deanna. She was a family law attorney, a college friend, the person I called when I needed someone who listened without redirecting and asked the right questions in the right order. I met her at the coffee shop on Main and Fifth, the one with the good light and the widely spaced tables, and I gave her everything. The printed transaction records, the annotated timeline, the 3 prior visits reconstructed with the detail I now understood each one deserved. She listened. She made notes on a yellow legal pad in small, precise handwriting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then looked up. "Has he asked you anything about the title recently? The mortgage? Refinancing?" "Not directly," I said. "His mother asked about the property value 2 Christmases ago, asked if I'd considered refinancing." "What did you say?" "That I hadn't, that the rate was good." She said. From Deanna, that conveyed considerable meaning. She looked at her notes. The approach, the gradual financial access, the sustained conversation about the title, the visits. It's not improvisation. It reads like someone who has had at least a preliminary conversation about what options exist. This is a strategy, Elena. Has Marcus received any legal advice you know of? Not that he's told me. Okay, she wrote something. Do not change anything about the title, the mortgage, the account structure, or any financial document without talking to me first. Deed. You have a copy? In the filing cabinet. Make a digital copy tonight. Then open a separate account at a different bank in your name only and begin directing a portion of your paycheck there before it hits the joint account. Don't discuss it." She looked at me steadily over her reading glasses. "And think carefully about whether Marcus knew. Not whether he was passive, whether he participated with intent. It changes what this is." I drove home in the late morning light with my coffee going cold in the cup holder and the city moving past the windows in the ordinary way it always moved. And I thought about Deanna's word, strategy, and about Sylvie's word, interesting, and about the difference between a woman who drops a coin in a well to make a wish and a woman who drops it to measure what's below. I made the digital copy that night. I opened the new account the next morning. I felt, setting it up, not satisfaction but grief. The specific grief of a woman performing a precaution she had never imagined needing, closing a kind of inner door that had been open, trustingly and completely, for a long time. Saturday dinner. I cooked properly. This was a choice, and I want to be precise about it. I could have ordered in. I could have matched the energy of Tuesday's cold sushi and charged it to whatever card was available. Instead, I spent the afternoon in my kitchen with good olive oil and thyme and a whole chicken and the kind of grain dish that requires patience, because there is a message that is communicated not by absence or withholding, but by fullness. A table that is clearly the expression of a woman at home in her space, unhurried and unintimidated. I wanted Sylvie to eat my food at my table in my house and understand without a single word being said about it that she was a guest here and that guests do not set the terms. She arrived at 6 in a sleek black car service, better than the Uber I'd booked her on Tuesday, which she had found and endured without apparent loss of composure. She wore a dark green wool coat that had cost serious money, and she brought a bottle of good wine, the kind people bring when they want to establish a register. And she kissed my cheeks at the door and said, "How kind of you to cook," with a warmth that was entirely performative and entirely convincing, and both of those things simultaneously, which is its own kind of talent. I watched her eyes move across the set table and the lit candles and the smell of the roasting chicken. Something shifted in her expression. Not much, just a micro recalibration. The look of a woman who has arrived expecting one kind of landscape and found slightly different terrain. Good. That was what it was for. Dinner was cordial. Sylvie told stories about Paris, about a gallery opening, about a friend's renovation that had uncovered 18th century plaster beneath a wall. Marcus was warm and present, in the way of someone performing warmth he wants very badly to feel. I asked questions, refilled glasses, listened. I was, by every observable measure, a gracious host. It was over the fruit tart that she said it. She said it the way she said everything, as if the thought had simply arrived in the natural flow of conversation, as if it were not the reason she had come. "I've been thinking about this house," she said, looking around the dining room with fond appraisal. "The bones are extraordinary. What do you think it would appraise for now, compared to what you paid?" "About 40% higher," I said. "The neighborhood has done well." 40%. She repeated it with the tone of someone finding a number agreeable. "Substantial equity. And you own it outright, yes? No mortgage?" "A small one," I said. "I've been paying it down." "Still." She glanced at Marcus, a glance that was not innocent, that carried something in it, a small transfer of meaning. "Have you ever considered adding to the title, making it properly joint?" The candle between us burned in a thin, steady column. "No," I said. She waited. "The house is in my name," I said. "I bought it before we were married. I've continued to service the mortgage from my income." I said it without emphasis, without apology, with the exactness of someone reading from a deed. "It's not something I've considered changing." Sylvie tilted her head. Of course. I only mention it because—" The pause of the practiced diplomatist, the pause designed to make what follows sound reluctant. "Marcus and I were talking, and he mentioned he's been contributing to the household for quite some time. I've always felt that in a real partnership, things should be equal. Shouldn't they?" I looked at Marcus. He was looking at the table. "Have you been contributing to the household?" I asked him. "In the sense she means, toward the mortgage, toward the ownership?" "I contribute to the expenses," he said carefully, "day to day." "With my card," I said, "for 13 months. The candle flickered. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. Sylvie set down her fork. The social warmth behind her eyes slid smoothly away like a panel opening, and what showed beneath it was something cooler and more considered. "I think Elena is tired," she said pleasantly. "Perhaps we should—" "I'm not tired," I said. She looked at me. "I'm paying attention," I said, which is a different thing entirely. Marcus walked his mother to her car at 8:30. I stood at the kitchen sink and listened. Front door, gravel driveway, car door, engine, and then the quiet that remained when those sounds had resolved, which was the quiet of a house that is waiting. He came back. He stood in the doorway. He said, "She was just asking." I turned off the tap. I dried my hands. I turned around and said nothing, because I had decided, somewhere between the fruit tart and the candlelight, that I was done filling silences. He moved to the island. He sat. He said, with the careful neutrality of a man navigating damage, "I know it came out wrong. She's from a different generation. She has opinions about financial structure, and they don't always— She means well." "What does she mean, Marcus?" He looked at the counter. "She worries about me, my situation. She has opinions about what a marriage should look like, about the structure. She asked me to add her son to the title of my house," I said. "That is not generational. That is specific." I set my hands flat on the island. "Has she said this to you before?" He was quiet for too long to mean no. "How long has she been saying it?" "A few years," he said, off and on. "And what did you say?" "That it wasn't my decision, that it was your house." "And what did she say?" He looked at his hands. "She said that was the problem, that keeping the house separate was a sign you didn't fully commit." "And you agreed," I said. "I didn't. You didn't disagree enough to stop her. Or you brought it up yourself and then didn't want to own it when she ran with it." I pulled out my phone. I opened the transaction history. "The charges, Marcus, 13 months, $4,800, not a flagged card. What was it?" The kitchen was very bright. The refrigerator hummed. He exhaled through his nose, and the exhale sounded like a man who has been holding something for a long time and is finally, uncomfortably, setting it down. "My freelance work slowed down," he said, "about 18 months ago. I didn't tell you because I kept thinking it would turn around. In the meantime, I needed to cover things, day-to-day expenses. I wasn't stealing, I was borrowing from the household account, with the intention of paying it back." "When were you going to tell me?" I asked. He didn't answer. "When were you going to tell me your income had dropped? When were you going to tell me you were using my card without asking? When were you going to tell me your mother had been orchestrating conversations about the title of my house?" I said this very quietly, not trembling, not hot, the temperature of a system that has identified a leak it can no longer afford to call manageable. "Those are separate failures, Marcus, but they all lead to the same place. You making choices that affect my life and my assets and my home, and not telling me because telling me would have required a conversation you weren't willing to have." He flinched at each item on the list as if they were blows arriving one after another. "I know," he said. "I know. I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "I need to think about whether sorry is the right unit of measurement here." I left the kitchen. I went to the small room at the end of the hall, my home office, the room with the filing cabinet that held the deed, the desk with the notepad where I had written $4,832 in careful block numbers. I sat in the desk chair. I sent Deanna a message. Saturday dinner. He confirmed the charges. She raised the title directly. Call me tomorrow. I sat for a long time after that. The house was quiet around me. The deed was in the cabinet 2 feet to my left. The digital copy was on my secure cloud. The new account was at a different bank. And I was, for the first time in quite a while, in full possession of the information I needed to decide what happened next. I had thought for years that love required a kind of deliberate blindness, that trust meant not looking too closely, that choosing someone meant choosing not to examine the small discrepancies that might, examined too carefully, resolve into a pattern you weren't ready to see. I had called this generosity. I had called it faith. I understood now what it had cost me. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the slow, accumulated way that unexamined things cost you, one quiet transaction at a time. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the yard. The house held me, and I began, precisely and without drama, to understand what I was going to do. The weeks that followed were not explosive. They were surgical. I want to be precise about that distinction, because people expect betrayal to resolve itself in a single dramatic confrontation. One scene, one door slamming, everything decided in the space of an evening. What actually happened was slower, more granular, and ultimately more permanent for all of that. You don't rebuild or dismantle something real in one night. You do it in increments, the way things are built and damaged in the first place, quietly, consistently, one decision at a time. Marcus told me everything over 3 conversations spaced across a week. He didn't offer it all at once. I think he was genuinely uncertain how much I already knew. And there was something almost archaeological about the process, each conversation going slightly deeper than the one before, as if he were testing the ground to see whether it would hold the weight of the next layer of truth before committing to it. The first conversation happened Sunday morning. He came to find me in my home office carrying 2 cups of coffee, a peace offering, or a prop, or both. He set one down in front of me without asking if I wanted it, which was an old habit, one of those small gestures from the early years that survive everything else because they're too ingrained to be self-conscious about. I wrapped my hands around the mug and waited. He told me about the freelance work first, how it had started declining 18 months ago. A major client had moved their contracts in-house. A second had folded entirely. He had covered the gap from savings, telling himself it was temporary, that the market would shift. When the savings ran down and nothing had shifted, he had started using my card. Small amounts first, real expenses that should have come from his account. He told himself he'd put it back when the next contract came through. The next contract was always 6 weeks away. "You should have told me," I said. "I know," he said. "I have enough income for both of us. We would have adjusted, made a plan. That's what people in a marriage do." "Telling you meant admitting it was real," he said. "I'd built something in my head about what I contributed, what the balance was between us. Saying it out loud felt like it would change how you saw me." "So you used my card without telling me instead," I said. 18 times over 13 months. "That's not a mistake, Marcus. That's a pattern." He didn't argue with that. He just looked at his coffee and said he was sorry, and I believed him, the way I believe people when the sorry is genuine, and also understand that genuine and sufficient are not always the same thing. The second conversation happened Tuesday evening, and this was the harder one. He sat across from me at the kitchen table where I had left the printed transaction records in plain sight, because having them visible was its own statement. I see this. I have not put it away. We are not done. He looked at the papers, then at me, and said, "Mom called today. She mentioned a financial advisor, someone she knows in Paris, a man named Gerard. She spoke to him about the house." I set down my wine glass. "Not recently," he said quickly. "A few weeks ago, before the Tuesday dinner. Gerard apparently outlined 3 scenarios for establishing a claim on a property that was the primary residence of both spouses, even if the title was in only one name." I looked at my husband's face in the kitchen light, and I thought very clearly, there it is. Not shock. I was past shock. Recognition. The shape of what I had been seeing in pieces resolving into its complete form. "She had an advisor outline scenarios for claiming my house," I said. "Yes," he said. "Tell me the scenarios." He told me. The first was adding Marcus to the title, already attempted and declined. The second was establishing a documented record of financial contribution to the property that could be used in a contested divorce proceeding to argue for a share of equity. The charges on my card, spread over 13 months, small enough to look like ordinary household spending, that was the record. Not carelessness, not temporary. A case being built, document by document, in the margins of our ordinary life. The third scenario was the one that made the room go still. She asked about refinancing, Marcus said, not looking at me. Whether, if the property was refinanced and I was added as co-borrower, not to the title, just to the loan, that would create any legal claim. I thought about every time Sylvie had mentioned refinancing. At Christmas 2 years ago, in Paris, at Saturday's dinner, casually, in passing, as if the thought had simply occurred to her. She was working a sequence, I said. Yes, he said, get me to refinance, get you on the loan, use the loan to argue for a stake, and the card charges were going to be Gerard's evidence that you'd been contributing all along. I said it without heat, just tracing the line, because seeing the shape of something clearly is its own kind of power. And you kept answering her calls. I kept telling myself she was just talking, he said, theorizing, that she'd never actually... He stopped. After Saturday, I understood she was serious, and I understood that not stopping her for 2 years was its own kind of choice. This was the most honest thing he had said to me in perhaps 2 years. I sat with it and let it be what it was, insufficient and also true, and more than he had previously offered, which meant something even when it wasn't enough. I need to call Deanna, I said. Okay, and you're going to be honest with her. Everything. Gerard, the scenarios, the dates, the conversations. Okay, he said. I turned back to the window. The October yard was dark now, the garden invisible beyond the glass. I believe you're not her ally, I said. But I need you to become actively mine. Active, not passive. That means the call to Sylvie happens tomorrow. Gerard's information goes to Deanna in full. And if your mother raises the house again, in any form, framed any way, you end the call. Yes, he said. And this time the yes was different. Less the yes of a man closing a difficult conversation, and more the yes of a man who had understood what the question costs. The third conversation happened the following Saturday. Marcus came into the kitchen where I was making breakfast and said, without preamble, Deanna says there's no viable legal claim. Given the deed, the mortgage history, and the absence of any signed agreement, nothing Sylvie has been building holds up. Gerard was working with hypotheticals that require your cooperation to function. I know, I said. He was quiet a moment. She also said you've known for weeks, the full scope of it, that you've been preparing. Yes, I said. You didn't say anything. I was waiting to see what you'd tell me on your own, without me showing you what I already had. I turned back to the eggs. Sit down, eat breakfast. He sat. We were quiet in the way people are quiet after something difficult has settled, and the quiet had texture, the texture of things rearranging themselves into a new configuration. The call to Sylvie was mine to make. I had thought about letting Marcus do it, but the more I considered it, the more I understood that letting him manage his mother on my behalf was exactly the structure that had allowed all of this to grow. He had been the intermediary between us for years, softening edges on both sides, managing the space between us, rather than allowing us to be in direct contact with each other's actual shape. That management had not protected me. It had only delayed the collision. I called her on a Thursday morning. She answered on the third ring. Elena, measured, curious. The tone of a woman waiting to see what move comes next. Sylvie, I said, I want to have a direct conversation. Of course, I've always preferred direct. Good. I know about Gerard. I know about the 3 scenarios. I know about the refinancing sequence and the logic behind the charges on my card. And I know how long you've been thinking about this. I said it without anger, a fact, stated plainly. I want you to know that I know, so we can stop having conversations that are pretending to be about something else. A silence, longer than her usual ones, which were always calibrated to a purpose. This one seemed genuine. "Marcus told you," she said. "Yes, everything." When she spoke again, her voice had shed its diplomatic layering. Not hostile, just direct, as if my directness had pulled the same register out of her. "He had nothing before you," she said. "No property, no savings. He worked for years and had nothing to show for it. And then he married a woman with a house and a salary and everything secured. And I watched him make himself small, comfortable, dependent. And I thought, what happens to him when this ends?" "Your assumption," I said, "is that it ends. Everything ends." "Some things don't," I said. "And planning for the failure of a marriage while it's happening is one of the ways you guarantee it fails. You were protecting him from me, and I am the person he married, so you were working against your own goal without knowing it." I let that sit. "The house is mine, Sylvie. The title stays in my name. There will be no refinancing that adds Marcus as co-borrower. Gerard scenarios have no viable path. That conversation is permanently closed, not negotiable, not revisitable. I need you to accept that before we can have any other kind of relationship." The silence that followed was the longest yet. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I know," I said. "Most people aren't once you look at them instead of at what you've decided they are." Something shifted. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the quality of a conversation that has finally found its honest register after a long time spent pretending. "The house is beautiful," she said. "Yes," I said. "I worked hard to make it that way." "I can see that," she said. And she said it without strategy, without overlay, and it was, I thought, the most honest thing she had ever said to me. "Dinner at Christmas," I said. A pause. "I'd like that," she said. Christmas came. Sylvie stayed at a hotel, her choice, offered before I raised it. She came for dinner both evenings and brought good wine and sat where I directed her, not in my armchair, and she told stories about Paris, and they were just stories. She asked about our work, she looked around the house once, just once, and said nothing except something quiet in French that Marcus translated on the drive to the airport afterward. "What did she say?" I asked. He kept his eyes on the road. "She said you've built something real here." We drove in silence for a while, the highway empty in the gray morning light, the winter fields flat and silver on either side. "I'm going to tell you something," he said. "Okay." I let myself believe that because she loved me, whatever she did was justified, that love is a justification, that I could outsource my ethics to her intentions and come out clean. He paused. "That's not how it works. I knew that. I chose not to apply it." "No," I said, "that's not how it works." "I'm going to do better," he said. Not a promise in the inflated sense, not the kind made in crisis and abandoned when the crisis passes, but the quiet, specific kind made by someone who has thought about what better actually requires. We dropped Sylvie at departures. She kissed my cheeks at the curb and looked at me for a moment before turning to the doors, and there was something different in the look, something that had shed the performance and was just itself. "Joyeux Noël," she said. "Joyeux Noël," I said. She wheeled her bag through the sliding glass doors and was gone. The months that followed were not dramatic. They were the specific, slightly tedious work that actual repair requires. The $4,800 repaid in installments as Marcus's freelance work recovered. The joint account restructured with explicit agreed terms. His income discussed openly, the shame of its decline draining away, once spoken aloud, and met with something other than judgment. These were not grand gestures. They were the daily maintenance of something worth maintaining. There were nights I lay awake and felt the full weight of what I had absorbed too patiently for too long. There were mornings when the grief of it, understanding the gap between the marriage I thought I was in and the one I had actually been navigating, sat heavy in my chest. I let it sit. I didn't rush it out. But there were also evenings when Marcus came home with the particular energy of a man who has been working and feels like himself again, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked the way we used to talk before the silences had accumulated, directly, with humor, without the careful management that had replaced honesty somewhere along the way. Those evenings reminded me what the choice had been made of before it was eroded, and they told me there was enough of the original material left to build something true with. I decided to build it. Not easily, not without full knowledge of what it had cost, but deliberately, with the specific deliberateness of a woman who has spent several difficult months in full possession of the facts and is making her choice with open eyes. Spring came. The asters in the back garden came back, pale purple and unhurried, the way they always did. Marcus came home one Thursday evening smelling exactly like work, and I opened the front door and he kissed me properly, the kind of kiss that is actually for the person being kissed, not for the room watching, and I let him in. I stood in my own doorway, my house solid at my back, the deed in the cabinet, the account at the other bank still open, because wisdom, once earned, doesn't have to be abandoned just because the crisis has passed. I had looked directly at something difficult when looking away would have been easier. I had found what I found, and I had done something with it, and the something had been enough. Some things you build, some things you fight for, some things you do both, and those are the ones that are truly yours, not just in title, but in the living of them. This house was mine in every sense that word can carry. I intended to keep it that way.